you to open up your hearts, open up your minds, and receive what God has prepared through his vessel, Bishop Melvin A. Jenkins.
I was I was really I was getting nervous there when that she started talking about it feels like when I was with my mother and she used to tear my mail open. Wasn't quite sure where that was going, but I totally understand what you're saying. Imagine that was an interesting experience. Now your mother had 9 kids. 9 kids. How many? 9 kids and 2 grandchildren. So she was doing a lot of mail reading. Well, it wasn't all girls though, right? 7 girls. So she was doing a lot of mail reading. Yeah, she was doing a lot of mail reading. I bet she didn't open the boys' letters. Yeah, she just opened up the girls' letters. That's a very interesting story. Good morning, everybody, and happy Father's Day. Um, this is Happy Father's Day is a good thing. It's important that we take time to recognize our fathers. Um, there's a couple of things, or there's a few things I want to say about that. And fathers, I think, are compared to mothers, I think, are underappreciated. I just think that's true. As a father, I think it's true. I think that fathers, and I mean, and I also understand that there are a lot of father issues. I have father issues, and many of my friends and colleagues here in this room have father issues. I used to volunteer at the prison, and they used to talk about how Hallmark, or I don't know if it was Hallmark, one of these greeting card companies used to donate cards to the prison, and they would donate cards for holidays for the prisoners to send to their relatives. And on Mother's Day, they donated the cards to there, and they ran out. But on Father's Day, they donated cards there for Father's Day, and there would just be a few of them taken. There'd just be tons and tons of them end up in dollar store, okay, because of the fact that the prisoners did not use the Father's Day cards. And so, and I mean, there's a lot of reasons and all of that, and I'm not going to get into any kind of a sociological conversation about it, but I'm simply saying that we need to take some time and appreciate the fathers that we have. And maybe even if those of us that have difficulties with a father or father person, father figure, whatever, maybe we ought to think about ways that we can help to build those bridges. Because whoever it is that's in our lives, we don't have them very long. And tomorrow has never been promised to any of us. So that's just something for us to think about. So then the question is now, did all of our fathers stand up and get recognized? Anybody didn't stand up? Any fathers didn't stand up? You want to stand up again? Okay, yeah. You're just happy because you're a father. Okay, all the fathers, please stand. Come on, that's right, that's right, that's right, that's right. All the fathers. Okay, yes, okay. Okay, fathers. Congratulations, congratulations. Now, who's the youngest father? Are you the youngest father? Oh, nope, Alan's the youngest father. All right. And who's the oldest father? Well, I don't know. I don't know. How old? 77? Okay. That's right. All right. Congratulations. Yes. God bless you, sir. 77. Okay. Yeah. I want to be just like you when I turn to be 77. Yeah. I got another 40 years to go. Okay. Okay. So we're going to get into the word, and years ago I used to always kind of be happy about the fact that I was not an occasional preacher, that I like to preach regardless of what the occasion was. I just preached the word. But today I have an occasional message. It is a Father's Day message, and I think it's something that's important for us to understand because even though no matter what has happened in our lives relative to our natural fathers, the truth of the matter is we all have the same Heavenly Father. And that's really important for us to understand. And when we think about it in those terms, and I realize the world and the nation and the world are so divided that they can't even realize that we all have the same Father. And there are some people that think that they're better than somebody else or whatever. But the truth of the matter is, if you realize that we all have the same Father, having raised more than one child in my house, I know how important it is that you teach and work with your children so that they get along with each other, because they're going to have to live their lives understanding that they're not the most important person in the world. And so it's an interesting thing when you think about God being all of our fathers, and He says to us, the two greatest commandments are love Him and love each other. Those are the two greatest commandments. And I think that if we were to look at how the ideal household is run, that those would be the two greatest commandments in the house. Make sure you have love for the parents, and also make sure you have love for each other. And if that happens, the household will run well. Not saying we'll always agree, not saying there won't be disputes or whatever, but the truth is the foundation of it all is love. And so if we realize that for what it's worth, it would really be something. So let's go into the scriptures. I want to read in the book of John, John's Gospel, chapter 8. We're going to read from verse 37 to 47. John's Gospel, chapter 8, verses 37 through 47. I know, verse 37, John 8, that you are Abraham's descendants, but you seek to kill me because my word has no place in you. I speak what I have seen with my father, and you do what you have seen with your father. This is Jesus talking to the Pharisees. They answered and said to him, Abraham is our father. Jesus said to them, if you were Abraham's children, you would do the works of who? Of Abraham. But now you seek to kill me, a man who has told you the truth, which I heard from God. Abraham didn't do this. You do the deeds of your father. I mean, you talk about wanting to get under somebody's skin. They said to him, we are not born of fornication. We have one Father, God. Jesus said to them, if God were your Father, you would love me, for I proceeded forth and came from God. Nor have I come of myself, but He sent me. Why do you not understand my speech? Because you are not able to listen to my word. You are of your father, the devil. I'm telling you, if they didn't want to kill him before now, they want to kill him now. You are of your father, the devil, and the desires of your father you want to do. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth because there's no truth in him. I mean, Jesus was reading their mail, okay? When he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own resources, for he is a liar and the father of it. But because I tell the truth, you don't believe me. Which of you convicts me of sin? And if I tell the truth, why do you not believe me? He who is of God hears my words. Therefore, you do not hear because you are not of God. I mean, it's like you talk about drops the mic. This is a very fascinating passage of Scripture because it shows such a sharp contrast between where Jesus was coming from and where the Pharisees, who were the church people of the time, were coming from. He is saying in so many words, I came from God. And they're like, so did we. And he said, if you came from God, you would never be treating me the way you treat me. Because we are supposed to have come from the same place. The truth is, you're acting in opposite ways of how I am to be treated, is what Jesus is saying. So therefore, you didn't come from God, you came from the opposite of God, which would be. And of course, from that moment on, they decided within themselves, we got to kill this guy because he's messing up our whole thing. And so for Father's Day, I want to use as a subject, very briefly, how can we tell who your father is? Ask your neighbor, how can we tell who your father is? How can we tell who your father is? If you look up the word that is translated in the Greek, father, you'll find some very interesting definitions. Of course, the Greek word is pater, P-A-T-E-R, from which we get the English word paternity, paternal. There's lots and lots of pattern. There are many words that come from the P-A-T-E-R that we associate with fatherhood. Obviously, if someone's going to have a child and we're not clear on who it is that has caused the child to come about, we have to go get a paternity test. So pater is the beginnings of the word that is translated in the Greek for father. But I began to look up the exact definitions. There are lots and lots of definitions to this. Obviously, there are the standard ones, the ones that are understandable, a male ancestor, the father that is natural in developing a child, a parent, a forefather, a grandfather. Those are all father terms, and they all have this word P-A-T-E-R as a part of them. And then I also continued to look and found out that is also a father can be one who stands in a father's place, who looks after another in a paternal way. And many people we know have father figures. And that is just as valuable, just as important as a father. It is not exactly the same, but for the purposes of this conversation, certainly one who stands in the place of a father, who is willing to raise a child and help out in the home the way that a father would fall under the definition here. Then there is the metaphorical definition. And this is the part that I want to get into today, just very briefly. The metaphorical definition, there's actually three of them. The first one is the originator and transmitter of anything. So they could say that George Washington is the father of the United States of America. Well, clearly, we know that biologically, it's not possible. But we understand that the originator, the first president, a lot of people say he's the father of this, or people say so-and-so is the father of modern technology, or the father of this, or the father of that. Well, we know that they're not actually physically the father, but metaphorically they are, because they may be the originator or the transmitter of anything. Second definition is the authors of a family or society of persons animated by the same spirit as himself. The authors of a family or a society of persons animated or given life by the same spirit as himself. And the final one is one who has infused his own spirit into others, who actuates and governs their minds. So when we think about those metaphorical definitions for the Father, one who injects their spirit into a group of people or into a body, one who actuates and governs the way that they approach things, how they think, and puts their own spirit into them, then it becomes an entirely broader situation. That is much the way that I believe God has planned for us. When we think about, let's talk about this for a second. I know having two kids, the older that they get, the more I can see the characteristics of us in them. And if, there's one of my kids that reminds me a lot of my wife. There's another one of my children that reminds me a lot of me. And you all probably can make that distinction as well. And the older that they were, it wasn't when they were little, we really couldn't tell it that much. It was just like one day they were this one day they were that one, and another day they were somebody else's. But as they got older, you want to turn this down a little bit, Roger? As they got older, because I'm about to yell, okay? As they got older, it began to become more and more clear that they began to take on the characteristics of their parents. And so that is the metaphorical definition for father. It is almost as if they began to take on the spirit, and no matter who our fathers are, our earthly fathers, the truth of the matter is, sooner or later, we're going to start acting like them. Whether you like it or not. I know there were things about my father that I absolutely did not like. More than one. But I also know that as I get older, come on here, I can see it, and I've got to fight it and battle it and struggle with it and deal with it in myself. And the thing is, it's like, it's just the way it is. It's nothing we can do about it. There's DNA. There's chromosomes, and it's interesting to me that the father is the one who actually determines the gender of the child. So he say, my wife didn't give me any sons. Well, your wife didn't have anything. Well, she had a little bit to do with it, but the truth of the matter is, the gender was determined by you. She provided the egg. You provided the chromosomes. It's like X's and Y's, right? Yes, okay. And I don't know which one is which. I don't care. The truth of the matter is that the chromosomes that determine the gender of the child come from the father. So no man in here better not ever say to his wife, you ain't give me my son, you ain't give me my daughter, you ain't give me what I wanted. You can either go in the mirror, look down, and talk to that thing and say, you ain't doing what you're supposed to do. Okay. Never mind, we're not going to get into that. Okay, but the truth of the matter is, she doesn't have anything to do with it. So it's interesting that the father actually determines the gender of the child. But not only that, but the father determines so many aspects of the child's life. I don't know why it is. I don't understand why God made it that way, why it wasn't 50-50 and all that stuff. But the bottom line is that our fathers have a tremendous influence on who we become and how we act, how we behave. When we were growing up, we had this family around our way. I won't say their last name, but we had this family around our way, and they had 4 sons. Yeah, they had 4 sons. And the father was a musician and a music teacher, and the mother was a musician and a music teacher. Guess what the 4 sons turned out to be? Just take a guess. Go ahead, take a wild guess. Very good. Musicians and music teachers. And each one of them was weird and quirky and strange, just like the father was. But full of music. I mean, just any instrument. Throw an instrument in there. They all start playing. I mean, just beautiful music. Tremendous abilities. Now, there's some tragic sides to that because the father was borderline on depressed and was kind of a bad temper and personality. And 2 of those sons committed suicide at different times. Tremendous musicians, but just strange because they had taken on these characteristics of the father, and they turned out really, really different. They ended up killing themselves. 2 of them did. 2 of them lived, 2 of them died. But the idea is that we have, no matter, and there are people, I know there are people that don't even know who their fathers are. A few years ago, there was a student here, and she came to my office. She was crying and everything, and she didn't have I knew her from the partnership program years before. I knew her family and everything. She came to my office crying. She said, my father died. I just got word. I said, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. When's the last time you saw him? She said, I haven't seen him since I can remember. But she was heartbroken because he had passed away. Because there was a bond between them that even though it was never fully realized, it still was there. And now it was a place where I won't have a chance to do anything about it. But the fact of the matter is, even if you don't know your father or don't have a relationship with your father, there are things that he put into you that are just there, whether we like it or not. Whether it's a good trait or a bad trait, the fact of the matter is, it's there. And it was put there by your father. On Mother's Day, I'll have a different message. Today is Father's Day. So for all of the mothers thinking, I got some traits too, we'll save that till next May. Today we're talking about fathers. So any of us that have children or any of us that ever were a child, came from somebody, we have characteristics of our fathers in us. Whether you knew him, whether he was good, whether he was bad, whether you grew up with him, or whether you never saw him before in your life. I was reading a post today about the famous attorney Lee Merrick. And Lee Merrick was is a very famous attorney. And he's the kind of guy that if you're on the wrong side of the law or something, you probably want to call Lee Merrick because he will fight to the death. And he talks about the fact that he'd had a horrible relationship with his father, but that his father was and is still in prison. His father's still in prison today. His father was a Crip in Los Angeles, known for killing people, and had a tremendous and tenacious attitude. He would fight you in a heartbeat. And now Lee Merrick, fortunately for him, has gone to law school and has taken that same tenacity and is fighting for good, but he understands and realizes enough to know the fighting that I have inside of me, I know where it came from. And I'm saying we are a product of that upbringing. We are a product of who we are, whether we like it or not, whether we know them or not. The fact of the matter is the DNA, the chromosomes, they're in us. Now, having said all of that, here we go back to our story, Joel. I didn't forget about how Jesus told them Pharisees off. He was on the Father's stuff. Let me go back to the story for a moment. So here we find Jesus, and what had happened earlier on that there was a conflict there. Jesus had gone through a conflict, and the Pharisees had been looking to trip him up for quite some time. Earlier on in that chapter, they had brought to him a woman that they caught in adultery. They caught her in the act. Sounds like a setup to me, but they caught her in the act of adultery, and they brought her to Jesus and said, listen, we found this woman in the act of adultery. What do you think we ought to do? Your word says to stone her. And of course, Jesus, once again, was ready for him. Okay, I'll stone her. You all want to stone her? Let you go ahead and start. Whoever doesn't have any sin, let him be the first one to throw the stone. One by one, they walked away, humiliated, embarrassed, left the woman with Jesus there standing. On and on. They look for ways to trip him up. They look for ways to argue with him. Eventually, they get into a conversation, and Jesus says, listen, you don't hear me. I came from my Father. And they get into, like, your father? Who your father? We don't know your father. Joseph? We came from Abraham. And that's when Jesus picked it up with the Father's Day message, okay? Let me tell you something. If you were from Abraham, you'd have Abraham's DNA. If you were from God, you'd have God's DNA. You'd have the characteristics of God. You'd have the attributes of God. Just like you have attributes of your Father because he's your Father, it's the same with us when it comes to God. And the truth of the matter is, like I said about my kids, as they get older, the older they get, the more clear the attributes of the parents should be manifested. Now I'm saying to us, we've been walking with God for a while now. Everybody, not everybody, but most of us have been walking to God for a while now. And we're getting to the age now where you ought to start showing some signs of who your Father is. You understand what I'm saying? And Jesus said to the Pharisee, listen, you've been in the church all these years, and I can't recognize any parts of your father in you. In fact, I do recognize a father in you somewhere, but it's not my father. Come on here, somebody. It's not the one that I came from. The father I see in you. And so I would say to us, we're walking with God. How many people in this, don't raise your hands, how many people in this room are Christians? How many people in this room are children of God? How many people in this room have been walking with the Lord? And I'm saying to us, if we are children of God, we ought to be showing some of his attributes. And I don't just mean on Sunday. We ought to be showing his attributes on the highway. We ought to be showing his attributes when we're watching television. We ought to be showing these attributes in the mall. Well, I guess we don't go to the mall anymore. Well, when we're on Amazon, we ought to be showing his attributes in our interacting with each other. We ought to be showing his attributes at work. We ought to be showing his attributes everywhere we go. Jesus said, listen, they were like, Abraham is our father, the Pharisees. Look at us. We've been in the church all these years. You know who our father is. We weren't born of fornication. God is our father. And Jesus says, if God was your father, you'd never act this way. If God was your father, you would never behave this way, because I have seen God act, and I know based on what I've seen in God, I don't see in you. Happy Father's Day. So if you have God, I'm just using you as an example, son. No, I'm not talking about you. Well, maybe I will, but no. If you have God inside of you, if you are a child of God, you ought to start acting like your father, because we ought to be able to see. Now, it's like you all can look at my kids. I have Melissa and Jasmine. Anyone that knows my kids, you can look at them and watch them interact for a while and watch them behave. I can look at Mel and, what's your son's name? Ian. I forgot his name that fast. Okay, I can look at Ian and Mel, and I can tell that they're your kids. I don't have to, well, which one are Mark's kids? I know I see music there. I see the seriousness, the work ethic. I see where they're coming from, and I can look at them and say, they must be Mark Stringer's kids just by how they act. You look at Melissa and Jasmine, you can tell right away. One of them's PJ and one of them's Lael. You look at the Turner kids. Oh my God, there's Theo, there's Malika. So I ought to be able to say, these are God's kids. Because I can see by the way they act. I can tell you must be a child of God. Now, this is a strange story, and I don't mean it. I just want to tell the story, okay? It's just happened. I'm just telling the story. It's the other Thursday. Last week, I did a presentation, and I was in front of a bunch of parents. They were the first day of orientation and all that stuff. So I'm doing my thing. I love talking in front of people. I'm just blah, 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 doing I'm trying to do what I do, you know what I'm saying? So I'm just blah, 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 talking about that. And so I had them laughing. Oh, you're so funny. Oh, my God. Okay, and then it was over. We did our thing, and I left. I didn't think anything more about it because I've done a million of those. Friday, it was Thursday, because Friday, I go in and I see the other lady that's running the program. The one lady that's in charge of the orientation. She says, I meant to tell you, Mel, yesterday I had a parent come up to me and say she just wanted to give you a big hug. Close your ears, Leo. Okay. She just wanted to give. So I'm like, first of all, okay, I'm not trying to catch no sexual harassment suit, okay? Okay, she ain't hugging nothing up in the university, okay? Can't hug anything, okay? Me too. I'm not saying I'm not going to be a part of that, all right? She said, she told me she just wanted to give a big hug to you. And she said, you just engaged the crowd so well, and she just loved it so much. And I'm like, oh, that's nice. I'm a little awkward, like, oh, okay, I hope I don't see her today. Like, if I do, I'm going to tell my secretary, don't let that woman in my office. Okay. So I said, oh, that's nice. And so I said, is she in because I was going to go into a second session with them. I said, is she in there? She said, I'm not really sure. She said, but I hope you don't mind. I took the liberty of telling her that you're a preacher. So I figured, okay, thank you. So I appreciate that because that's going to save me. She said, I took the liberty of telling her that you're a preacher. And she said, and the woman said, that's what it is. My father was a preacher. And I knew there was some kind of a connection that we made. Now, I'm saying that example, which just happened last week, Thursday and Friday, to say this. All of us need to carry ourselves in such a way that you can recognize, anybody can recognize the Father in us as they go throughout their daily life. When we go to California, my wife will tell you, we go out to visit with Latera. A lot of you all know Latera. Everywhere Latera goes, hey baby, hi, hey, oh my God, there's Latera. Everywhere. It's like we're in McDonald's, not McDonald's, I don't know, some grocery store. It's like, oh, here she comes. It's like, why do you know the people in the grocery store? Like, I don't really care about the people in our grocery stores. Why do you know the people in the grocery store? And she said, I've got to show the love of God. And everywhere she goes, everybody knows who she is. Do they all go to her church? No. You know, it's just a matter of the Father in her is recognizable everywhere she goes. And I'm saying that to say to us, we have or should have the characteristics of our Father in us. I don't want Jesus to say, you do have your Father in you, but it's not the same as my Father. Okay? I see your Father in there. Let me just say, he's there all right. No, we don't. I want to be in a place where all of the people can see my Father in me. Not George Jenkins. Not George. Not George Jenkins. Because George Jenkins had his own issues. But my Heavenly Father. And for those of us that don't even know who our Father is, we really don't have anywhere else to turn but to God. We were born of God. I know we came on earth at a certain time, but all of us have been born again. And when we were born again, we were born of the Spirit. So therefore, we ought to take on the characteristics of our Father. Are you with me? So I would ask again, I need some fans on here, Raj. Get a little stuffy in here. A little stuffy. Yes. Thank you. I would ask again. Can anyone see the Father in us? I just want to know. I don't mean David Hanson. I mean the big Papa. Heads are bowed, eyes are closed.